The number one thing is a good team, right? So the leadership team you hire has to be good at what they do, because you can't do a job like EPA CIO or CIO of Santa Clara County by micromanaging and doing everything yourself.
Welcome to the CEO Sessions, hosted by Ben Fanning. And here's Ben.
Wow, do I have a great episode in store for you today with Duncan, who's the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for State and Local Government at Dell Technologies. Prior to joining Dell, she was the Chief Information Officer for the County of Santa Clara, located in the heart of Silicon Valley. And in case you didn't know it, Santa Clara is huge. It is the 15th largest county in the United States. Prior to joining Santa Clara County, Ann served in the Obama administration as the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA. She also served in senior leadership positions for the Palo Alto Unified School District and Hewlitt Packard. Most recently, she served as an editor for the International Journal of Advances in Software and the Agile Government Leaders Board of Directors and the Georgia Tech President's Advisory Board. Ann has received many awards, including ComputerWorld's Premier 100 Technology Leaders, Washington, D.C.'s Top 50 Women in Technology, and she was also inducted into the Georgia Tech's Academy of Distinguished Engineering Alumni. She has a master's degree and her bachelor's degree also from Georgia Tech. And what you're going to get in the episode today, we start out talking about what you can learn about leadership from philately. And if you're not familiar with that, it is a fancy word for stamp collecting. And believe me, it is an interesting thing. And Ann really does a nice job of tying it all together in terms of how that's affected her leadership. Then we get into the time that Ann got the call from the White House and what it was like going through Senate confirmation for the EPA. Then we start talking about more leadership philosophy and why instilling a sense of ownership is the one trait that she'd instill in every employee. Then we talk about how to take smart risk on the job and how to teach your team to do the same. She is well versed in this. She's spoken at many conferences about this topic, and I think you'll get a lot from that. Then we get into taking leaps of faith. And Ann has taken many leaps of faith in her career, and she's got a lot of wisdom in this and insight, and I think you'll find that to be very practical. Then she shares how she responded when some of the U.S. senators that she was going through confirmation hearing through, she heard that they thought that she wasn't qualified to be CIO of the EPA, and of course, she became CIO anyway, and so how she handled that is quite insightful. Then we get into Ann's colorful story of when she needed to let someone go at work. And believe me, you're not going to want to miss that. That's about halfway through the interview. Then the back half of the interview, we get into some really personal stuff that I think you're going to find very interesting, like how getting laid off during the peak of the 2008 recession led to Ann's biggest job opportunity of her career, and what kept her going during a dark time in her career. I actually get a little choked up, and my apologies in advance for that part, but you'll get into that piece about the last 10 minutes of the episode. And then we wrap up giving you the scoop on Ann's new book that's coming out on digital transformation. It sounds like a practical and powerful tool to help you transform your organization. So without further ado, enjoy the episode. Hey, Ann, thanks for joining and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
We are going to have a great interview in store for all the listeners today. Ann and I connected over Georgia Tech, and before the episode got started, we're talking a little football. So this is the 2020 pandemic college football season. If you're listening a few years later, and boy, has it been exciting. But instead of just talking sports, I've got a question that I'm burning to ask Ann. And that is, how did you get involved with philately? And please tell the listeners what that is in case they have no idea what that is.
Well, philately is basically a fancy word for collecting stamps. And, like a lot of people, I got involved because I knew adults when I was a kid who collected stamps. My mother had a worldwide stamp collection, and she had a friend. My parents had a family friend in England who was a very serious collector. And so, I collected a little bit as a kid. And then, like most of us, I set it aside. I went to college. I started a career sometime about 15 years ago or so, maybe closer to 20. I picked it back up. And what I really found, was instead of sort of that childhood thing of you find stamps and you fill the spots, was it really dovetailed with my interest in history and also aviation, because what I actually focus on these days is some early U.S. airmail issues, and there are actually two of them that I have interest in. One is the second airmail issue, which was from the 1920s, and so very early airmail, so early routes and routes and the history of aviation and the history of airmail.
Okay.
So to me, that's really cool. The second one, which I think is really cool, is that's sort of an expensive little pursuit. That the stamps, the covers are all very expensive, and so I was like, I need to find something that I can actually afford to do. And so there's a Universal Post Union issue that was put out in the late 40s. And it has 3 stamps, and one of them is a picture of the of what was the old post office headquarters. So the Postal Service used to be called the Post Office Department. It was a cabinet level agency, and in the 30s there was a postmaster named Farley who was a buddy of Roosevelt's, and he built himself a new building in Federal Triangle, and that building he had the biggest office of any cabinet member. He was determined that he was going to have that. Well, fast forward a number of years, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is the current occupant of that building. So there is a stamp with a picture of the building that I worked in when I was in D.C.
Wow. So it has come full circle from childhood to the current day. And here's a little off the wall question. How has being involved in that community and in that hobby, so to speak, informed your leadership style?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think that it's, that's an opportunity, like some of my other professional activities, to engage with people that have very different interests than the people that I engage with on a day-to-day basis, and a much more global perspective. When I am involved with the Philadelphia community, or I'm involved with, say, the Winter Simulation Conference, I'm talking to people who live in Europe. I'm talking to people who live in Asia, or maybe who live in the United States, but whose interests are, say, my friend Ian, who is English and lives in the U.S., and his interest is Asian philately, right? So I have conversations with Ian about things that are very wide-ranging because of his personal interests. And, so I think that it broadens your worldview to engage in conversations with people who have very different interests and very different backgrounds and very different work experiences. And you learn from people who are running totally different organizations. I mean, there's this young man I know who is in his 20s, who is the president of an international auction house, right? and the opportunity to have conversations with him and see his experience of being invited to the Monaco philatelic event every year and meeting the king and those sorts of things. So it just widens your worldview in interesting and unexpected ways to be involved in things that aren't your regular job.
Wow, I love that. So as CTO, you're thinking about business, and we'll get into that more. You're thinking about the world of Dell, and when you go into this mindset, it exposes people in different industries, different areas, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to benefit from that in your CTO job day to day, but it does inform the world, your global perspective and those relationships. And man, I think that's a great leadership connection.
Yeah, I think it's fun, right? You get to, really any hobby, most hobbies are really about the people you meet. I mean, you get this thing you do and it's fun, but if I play golf, it's who do you meet on the golf course? I'm involved in hobbies. Who do you meet in the hobby? And you go to a football game, right? Who do you meet in the stands sitting next to you? That's sort of what's really interesting beyond what your particular hobby or interest is.
That makes a lot of sense. And let's connect the dots a little bit. So you mentioned the EPA and you mentioned the stamp, and I would love to hear the story about you getting the call from the White House and what that led to.
Sure. And there's a little backstory to that, which is in 2000 and 6, 7, something like that. I should go back and look up the date because I keep telling this story and I don't remember the date.
I won't fact check you.
Yeah. I was working for HP, and I was chair of HP's Global Pride Council. And so one of my jobs as chair of the council was to arrange for a HP meeting at Out and Equal at their conference. And their conference was held in DC that year. And I reached out to the Human Rights Campaign to arrange for us to visit with them because they were right down the street from where the conference was. And met a guy named Samir Luther. And Samir was responsible for our engagement, and that he scheduled the day. And we had a great time. A couple of years later, and it was in the fall of 2010, I run into Samir at the Out and Equal conference, and he says, "Hey, send me your resume. I'm working for the Presidential Appointments Project, and I'd really like to have your resume." And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll send you my resume. But,
So you didn't just go light speed? I'll send it to you right now.
Well, part of me is like, this is a pretty long shot, right? Okay. Like, sure, I'll send you my resume. So this is, like September, October 2010. So I'm sitting in my office in October of 2012, and my phone rings, and the person at the other end of the phone says, "Hi, this is so-and-so from the Office of Presidential Personnel." Right. And after that sentence, I'm about ready to hang up the phone because I think it's a joke. And then she says, "Samir Luther brought me your resume," which is why I actually didn't hang up on this.
This is my friend from like 3 years ago who's crank calling me or something.
So you don't expect, a phone call from the White House. And so the really funny corollary to that story, which I don't think I've told a lot in interviews, because it's sort of it's kind of a weird story, which is I was going through this vetting process, and this took a long time. This is 2012. I didn't start my job until 2014. So I'm going through my vetting process, and I'm expecting a call from a White House lawyer. And when you get a call from the White House, there's no caller ID, right? It's blocked. So I get this call. It's
not Barack Obama's personal cell phone number. It's popping up on the caller ID. Okay, it's unknown.
Yeah. So you get no caller ID. So my phone rings. It's a blocked caller ID. I pick it up, and this guy starts a sales pitch. And I said to him, "I'm sorry, I can't talk to you right now. I thought the White House, I'm expecting a call from the White House, and that's who I thought you were, and I need to go." And I basically hung up the phone. And afterwards I realized this guy probably thought I was just a total jerk, making up this story about expecting a call from the White House.
Oh my gosh.
So there's some sales guy somewhere telling this story.
That's a funny one. Yeah, I can imagine. Like, this lady thinks all due respect, she was just giving me a hard time. I'm just trying to do my job over here.
Exactly.
And so you get connected to the White House, and then is it a pretty intense vetting process? Was it a excruciating experience?
Well, part of it is they called before the election about a particular agency, which ended up getting filled by somebody else. But they said, the election's next month, so we don't know what's going to happen. So, we just want to talk to you, and then we'll be back in touch. Right. So I don't think I heard anything again till like January. So this process just sort of it dragged until it got really busy, and then it dragged again. So it dragged out. I finally went out in the summer of 2013 for some interviews, right? And I had interviews with a couple different agencies, actually 3 agencies. And EPA was the one where I felt like it was a great fit for me, and they were the first one that called me back, and so that worked out really well. And then we got into the vetting process. So I had this job offer in September of 2013 that I couldn't tell anybody about. Yeah. Got a job offer, can't tell anybody. So they start the vetting process, and they start talking to the FBI. And because it was a presidential appointment, the FBI does the background check. Usually it's the Office of Personnel Management. The FBI actually does the background check. So these FBI agents are calling my friends and family, and we're getting all wound up about it. And all this was going on while it started. I got my job offer, and then they shut down the government. Right. So the budget, the budget crisis budget problem hit, the government shut down. So this vetting process actually started during government shutdown, and then it continued. And then it was nearly done, and there was some congressional drama, which we don't need to get into, and they restarted the whole thing again. So that was my nomination wasn't actually announced until January of the next year. Right. So this is the process.
Yeah, a very long, drawn out process.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Were there any moments in there where you were thinking this may not be worth it because it's getting so long, or were you were eager to?
Well, I was worried it might not happen, right? Because the Senate, so my job was the job I was nominated for was Senate confirmed. And the Senate did not confirm anyone at the EPA after Gina McCarthy in 2014. So, we went through this process of getting me vetted and getting me teed up for the Senate, and I had a hearing, and then they didn't do anything. And so ultimately, they brought me in as a senior advisor to Gina McCarthy. And then after that, what we basically did was found a way for me to be able to legally work for the EPA, right? To do the CIO job, because the CIO job was not actually the job that I was being nominated for, because they had they combined the assistant administrator and the CIO. So we separated.
Gotcha, okay, all right.
And we made me the CIO. And then my deputy was the acting assistant administrator. So,
got it.
So
they made it work.
Yeah, they made it work.
What's one thing that you took from going through that process?
Well, I mean, I think it was a very, we all know that there are challenges with how the legislative and the executive branches work together. And I think it was just a real firsthand perspective on how hard the challenges of getting things done in DC, how hard it is, and all the various perspectives in that process. It just made that all very, very personal and real for me. So.
Yeah, having lived through it, you saw it firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
So it ain't easy is one of the key messages there. And one of the things that I've already picked up on thematically for you, and is the importance of relationships and building those positive relationships, right? Through the STAMP community. You mentioned HP and the Out and Equal conference and those relationships that you've built along the way. Is that a key leadership skill that you've really honed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, Ben, leadership is about people and relationships. A good leader has to have relationships with the folks in their organization. And I spend a lot of my time as a leader with people and on relationships with people. And I think if you ask people about me as a leader, one of the things that they will tell you is I'm a very accessible leader. I will talk to anyone in the organization who asks to talk to me. I may not be able to do it today. It may take a week or two, depending upon what's going on. But my door really is open to anyone who works for me, and that means that I don't always understand everything going. My last organization was a target headcount of 1,000 people. So I can't claim that I understand every nuance of everything that's going on in the organization. But
yeah, that's a lot of people to know all the projects, to know all the details. What's one of the keys to managing that? Because you've got to know ultimately as the leader where everything's headed, and if it's not heading in the right direction, correct it, make sure it's on time. How do you get sleep at night?
I don't have trouble sleeping, mostly because I'm probably too tired. I think the number one thing is a good team, right? So the leadership team you hire has to be good at what they do, because you can't do a job like EPA CIO or CIO of Santa Clara County by micromanaging and doing everything yourself. And I have colleagues, CIOs in the public sector who do that. And, they sort of do it in there. I see two versions of that. One is I'm in everybody's stuff, and the other one is I'm in every technical detail. And I have conversations with some of my colleagues where they're talking about the technical details of this or that implementation, and I think, am I doing something wrong? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing something wrong. I don't need to know that. I don't need to be in that detail about was this provider or that provider the right one for this project. But you have to have good leaders that you can trust to make those decisions and to lead the folks and to let you know when something's going wrong. And the other thing is having good systems and structures that will bubble things up, right? So having good project planning and reporting, for example, so that you can see what projects are in flight, how much money they're spending, what their status is. Now, lots of organizations have the classic problem of green, red projects, where everything's reported as just fine.
Yeah.
Just fine until
the criteria can vary from day to day. Well, that's not really a red one anymore. Let's make that yellow.
Yeah, and then it's green and then it's failed. And so the structures are only as good as the way people use them, but having some structures in place to give you information about what's going on in the organization is hugely important, right? It's a cliche only because it's true that what gets measured gets managed.
Hear to that. It reminds me of expect what you inspect.
Yeah. But what's important though is to make sure your measures don't incent the wrong behavior. That's the other challenge, is to make sure you're generating the right behavior with what you measure.
One of the things that comes up for me in your background, having gone from the commercial sector or to the government sector, now back to the commercial sector, back and forth. You've seen both structures, and there are probably a lot of people listening today that maybe they're trying to weigh those differences. I'll talk. Yeah, we just released an interview with Seth Goldman, who was the founder of Honest Tea, and he started out working for like the Dukakis campaign and Lloyd Benson, and then went into the commercial sector later and founded his business. And he found that he could make a lot of social change in the commercial sector. Mm-hmm. But from your perspective, what are the questions that people should be really thinking about if they're at a crossroads trying to decide between one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things about the public sector that are really hard. And it always amuses me when people will say, well, it doesn't amuse me, actually. It irritates me. People say, public sector folks, they're lazy. They don't get anything done. It's so easy. If you can get something done in the public sector, folks in the private sector should be clamoring to hire you because you can get 10 times as much stuff done in the private sector.
All right.
I mean, because there's so many constraints against that make it hard to get things done in the public sector. As a private sector CIO, I can say I want to buy that. As a public sector CIO, I probably have to run a 2-year process that I don't even get a say in to decide what I'm going to buy.
Wow.
So there's a lot of complexities, which we won't go into all of them, but so I think it's really important for someone who's thinking about the public sector to be clear on number one, that they are motivated by intrinsic rewards, and that they'll be motivated by achieving the mission that they want to accomplish, because it's an incredibly rewarding experience to achieve that mission, but you're not going to get paid very well. If you're really good at what you do, you can make a lot more money in the private sector. And you're going to deal with a lot of hassles to get there. But the reward of being able to do that is amazing, right? And the other rewards, I mean, there are some other things that generally come with the public sector, right? There's more job stability. You're less likely to get laid off. Although as a Fed, you might get furloughed every once in a while, unfortunately, these days. But they've all, but they always get paid afterwards. It's just, you better have your savings so that you can manage that. You're going to have better job security. It's the advancement in the federal government tends to be a little more of a meritocracy than in the private sector. Not entirely. I mean, but because of the way that jobs are written and jobs are handled, it tends to be a little more merit based. And and you're going to likely have better work-life balance, although not every federal job or every state or local job is, it has great work-life balance. But you're less likely to have 2 a.m. calls with India and things like that, because it tends to be focused on the continental United States or the broader United States. So there are those, and there's a pension. Frankly, the federal pension is not great. It used to be. It's not, current feds, you're not getting a great pension. It's 1% a year. You're not talking about big, you work 30 years, you're going to get 30% of your salary. You're not going to retire on that. But there are those advantages. You go to the private sector, you can move faster, and you're going to probably make more money if you're good at what you do. But you're ultimately going to be, in most cases, looking to help your company make money, right? And that's fine, because companies have to make money to exist, right? I'm a capitalist, just like everybody else in this country, or most everybody else in this country. I believe in capitalism. I think it's important. I don't believe in unfettered capitalism, but I believe in capitalism, and I think companies can do good. And I think a lot of companies are, doing more good. I mean, Dell's mission explicitly states, right, that they want to create technology that makes the world better. And I think, and I think that more and more companies recognize that they can do well by doing good. But when the rubber meets the road and profits are down, there's no loyalty there. So, those are the kinds of trade-offs people need to think about. Most of the feds that I know, particularly feds, but state and local government folks as well, love what they do and wouldn't do anything else.
Wow. Man, that is a very thorough list I'm in a very good list that can help a lot of people to really think through that process, no matter where you are in your career, if you're thinking commercial sector versus the government sector. Go ahead.
Before you go, I just add to that. I would encourage anybody. In fact, I wish we had mandatory government service. I would encourage anybody to spend a couple years in the government, especially the federal government. We would have open their eyes. We would have a much better political process in this country if everyone understood how the government worked.
So stuff you can't get from textbooks, learning about these are the three branches of government and whatnot. You got to experience it firsthand. Okay. Yeah. Well, you know what? Really, if you want to learn about anything, that's the best way to do it, is to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, dig in, whether it's a spreadsheet or government or whatever it happens to be, to get in there and see the details behind the scenes. And you come out a changed person now. And I sense that you probably did too. After you
absolutely, I've learned a ton, and I have no regrets of what I've chosen to do. In fact, I wouldn't pass up my time at the EPA for anything.
Let's shift gears just a little bit. And we didn't really spend a lot of time on where you came from and if you ever thought you'd be CTO. I'd like to hear a little bit about that, and then I would like to hear, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. So, Ben, as you know, I went to Georgia Tech, studied industrial engineering.
Yeah.
Stingham, exactly.
And for the listeners, that's how we connected. I found Ann, who was a highly distinguished Georgia Tech alumnus. She's on multiple boards there. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ann.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah.
But she's not coaching the football team, but that might be her next big step.
I think I can't compete with the energy Jeff Collins brings to football. I'll tell you that, man. So my, at Georgia Tech, studied industrial engineering, manufacturing engineering, went to HP from there. I spent the early part of my career in manufacturing engineering, particularly automated material handling design, which is a core competency that was existing at Tech at the time that I was in grad school. And over time, it became quite apparent that manufacturing, if I didn't want to spend all my time on a plane to Singapore, was not really the ongoing career I wanted. And also the factories in the U.S. that I was working with kept getting shut down. So I ultimately decided to go into R&D, and I worked my way. You can't go directly from manufacturing to R&D at HP because R&D is sort of the crown jewel, and you got to earn your keep. So I went from manufacturing to quality, and then into R&D. And then almost immediately was offered a promotion to an operations director role right after I'd gone to R&D because this organization was growing. So I finally got where I was wanting to go, and then I immediately left. So go figure. But ultimately, a result of that was I wound up getting reorganized into IT. I had some IT-like responsibilities when I was in operations, and in some of the HP restructurings, I got restructured into IT. Did that for a few years. I was basically the equivalent of the CIO for an Israeli company we acquired called Indigo. Did a few other things there. Then there was some restructuring. Randy Mott came in as CIO, and I wasn't really thrilled with what Randy was doing. Went to R&D again and spent 3 years this time. And
for the listeners, there's a giant cat.
Giant cat just appeared. My elderly Maine Coon has arrived.
Oh,
yeah.
So as twists and turns, you followed the path. What would you do differently during that from that time?
Yeah. So I think the biggest lesson is, when people ask me the lesson, I say don't get too comfortable. I think I got too comfortable at HP. HP sort of broke the social contract with employees in terms of that lifetime employment thing, and the employees kind of didn't really notice. And so after my career stopped really advancing, and I still stayed. Now, it was that was the time during which both my parents died and some other things. So one could argue that maybe I should have stayed because that stability in my life was important. But I probably stayed at HP 7 or 8 years longer than I should have. So you don't be afraid to go out on a limb and do something. When I took this job in DC at EPA, I knew there were only 2.5 more years in the administration, but I went anyway. I figured something
because he was on his
out.
second term. So
Yep, something will work out. It'll be fine. Can't pass this up. So
with that said, when you make those leaps, is there some sort of inner belief in yourself? Some kind of universal belief, your faith, where do you go to in those moments when you're making those big leaps in your career?
Yeah, I think it's taking advantage of the opportunity, first of all, saying there's an opportunity here that I really need to take advantage of. And having faith in my ability to be successful and to have that next opportunity show up afterwards. And there were plenty of opportunities when I left EPA. So that was true. Right? There were people who were interested in seeing what I'd done at EPA and who were interested in hiring me based on my track record. But it's that leap of faith that everything will be okay, right? And you kind of have to say, what's the worst thing that can happen? I could end up unemployed. Well, that's happened before, and I survived that. I could survive it again.
Okay. So you look back, it sounds like you have a belief in yourself that no matter where I'm end up, I'm going to be able to work my way through this. Was this confidence instilled in you as a child, or did you discover it along the way?
I'm not sure I know the answer. I mean, certainly my father was always a believer that, I could do anything. His children, all of us, could do whatever we set our minds to, which has not always been true. I'm not a pro golfer, so clearly I didn't do everything I set my mind to. But I think that our parents certainly raised us to be confident in ourselves. And I think that helps. And then you have some success over the years and you just have to have some confidence. But I'll tell you, every single job I've ever had, I'm like, you start that job and you're going, well, do I know what the hell I'm doing? Right? I think we all do. We all walk in there going, okay, I convinced them to hire me. Was I right? So
having the courage to bite off on something a little bigger than you can chew initially and grow into it.
Right. I mean, so I'll share that one of the things that I don't recall, I don't think it was said in public at my confirmation hearing. I think it was sort of back channeled that some of the senators thought I wasn't qualified. Because if you look at my resume, I was managing less than 100 people, fewer than 100 people, excuse me, at my last job, and a tiny, tiny budget. And here they were going to give me, 400 direct reports, an equal number of indirects, and $400 million. And so on the surface,
that's a lot.
yeah, you could say, what the hell are you doing? But, I had a long history of experience. I had managed some relatively large budgets and some large teams as a project manager, program manager. But, it was a leap of faith for me too. I mean, the first call I got was about an organization where the IT budget was $1 billion. And I was a little intimidated by that. Now I wouldn't be. But at that point I was, wow, $1 billion. I don't know if I can manage $1 billion. Now I'd have no trouble managing $1 billion budget. I was managing $500 million in my last job. And the difference between $500 million and $1 billion is really meaningless when you start talking about scale.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yeah, once you do it, you get through it, you've grown through it, and the next step doesn't seem quite as insurmountable, or maybe it's quite as big a risk.
Right, exactly.
On a little bit of a different note, are there any routines or strategies that come up for you when we start talking about things like work-life balance?
Yeah, I'm really not very good at work-life balance. I really.
In what way?
Well, I mean, I tend to work too much. I mean, that's my problem. Is I tend to work too much, and it's some jobs are easier than others. It's certainly right now while we're all at home. I know some people are struggling. For me, it's really much easier now that when I'm at home all the time to say, okay, it's 5:00. I'm going to go feed the cats, and I'm going to go think about what I'm going to have for dinner, and I'm not going to work anymore. And occasionally, some nights I will come back and do a little bit of stuff that's not finished. I know other people aren't feeling that way, and that may be because they don't have other interests. I've got lots of other things I want to be doing. But, I'm one of these people. I like to have my email box empty. I like to have my project list, taken care of. And so I'm not really very happy if there's a whole bunch of stuff hanging when I end at work. And then you throw on business travel and lots of meetings, and it's hard to keep up, and then I work too much. So I think that what's important is to make sure that you carve out enough time for the really important things. So I've always made sure to find time to exercise, and I'm pretty good at that, even when I'm really busy. I mean, occasionally I'll miss a few days or when I've got a serious deadline, but I try and keep up with that, so understanding what the non-negotiable things in your life are, whether it's, having dinner with your family every night, or going to the gym, or going for a walk, whatever it is, and trying to make sure you fit those in. To me, that's sort of the priority, even if I can't maybe get to 40 or 50 hours a week.
What's the one trait you wish you could instill in every employee? A sense of ownership for their work. What would the world be like?
Well, I think if everybody had a sense of ownership for their work, we would be far better at meeting commitments and achieving better results for whether it's the private sector or for the public sector. We create too many environments where people feel like they have no power, and when they feel like they have no power, then they feel like they have no ownership, and they just wait. The huge problem in the government is people sort of just waiting for the next, for all these things to get done so that they can do their part, because as I said, things take a really long time in the government. They can be hard to get done. People get frustrated. They sort of give up on trying to drive things forward, and they just wait. And then it gets worse because people are just, well, I'll wait till my piece comes up. So that's one of the key things that we did with a lot of our work at EPA, was really reinstilling that sense of ownership for people, and a bias towards action to get that problem solved, to figure out how to move something forward, so that we could make more progress.
That's a powerful trait. When an employee has a big idea, what's your advice to them? What's your advice to them in terms of how they should communicate it to the C-suite?
So I think that they need to communicate it based on outcomes. What will this idea bring to us, and then they need to line up support. And I think that sometimes they can't line up support, and sometimes you have to say, I'm just going to do the Hail Mary because I think it's really important. But to the extent they can, they really need to sort of line up the leadership team so that when they come to the C-suite, there's not anyone trying to backstab them and bring them down. But really, it's what will this do for our customers, for the public, for our employees? What does this big deal bring to the table?
Yeah, bringing it back to stamps It's about understanding the worldview of other people, it sounds like. So when you present it, you're presenting in a way that they can accept it or they can get on board with it or understand it.
Yeah, it's a good point. You said it better than I did. It's, put yourself in my shoes as CIO, and what do I need from that idea?
Mm-hmm. Love that question. What is leading through taking risk?
So the whole thing about risk taking is something that I have really focused on in the public sector, because there are all sorts of controls that make it so that public sector employees don't want to take risks. And it's sort of ironic because they have great job security. But the stakes are often high. In a procurement, you screw that up, you can go to jail, right? So it's really encouraging people to understand what they want to achieve, and then to identify smart risks, reasonable risks, right? I don't want people to go do stupid things. I want them to take well-measured, thoughtful risks, and I want them to talk to their management so that someone's got their back. Right? So I want to go do this thing. Boss, do you have my back? Are you going to support me if I do this? And then to go take that risk. I would much rather, using the analogy I used with EPA, or the story or whatever you want to call it, I would much rather go to Congress and explain why I lost $1 million on a project, or $500,000 or $50,000 because the project didn't work out. And by the way, Congress is probably never going to call you up over $1 million. I would much rather do that than be sitting in a hearing on Capitol Hill explaining why my $500 million project failed. And this is incredibly counterintuitive, but $500 million projects in the government fail because people are afraid to take risks.
Wow.
So instead of taking a risk on a...
Go ahead. No, that's okay. Go with that. Yeah.
Instead of taking a risk on a small project and trying something, they will go to the traditional model, which is do a big project, spend a couple years writing your requirements, spend a year or two doing a procurement, and give this big $500 million project to a systems integrator. And when it doesn't go well, they throw more money at it because they don't want to admit failure. And so then you've got a $5 billion failed project that Congress is screaming about, rightfully so. Instead of them taking a project and going, I'm going to go and figure out how to do this thing, and I'm going to experiment and spend $50,000 or $100,000. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We've set up this culture where we make big bets and then we keep throwing money at them to keep them from failing. And that is a government problem. You don't see a whole lot of that in the private sector. Occasionally you'll see it happen in the private sector where people continue to throw good money after bad, trying to make something work. But the fact that they have to turn a profit tends to stop people from doing that. But government agencies don't want to admit failure, and they don't want to take risks. So they do this thing that they think is not risky, even though we've demonstrated over and over and over again it doesn't work. Got it.
Okay. So the art of taking smart, smaller risk to build momentum towards bigger projects. Don't bet the farm. Don't go say you're going to be in Las Vegas for a week. Don't go on the first night and put $1,000 on roulette on black and then lose it all and not be able to play anymore. Yep. Start small. Okay. I've got to ask you about this quote. And you can correct this quote if it's wrong, but I believe this is an Ann Duncan quote. You can train your employees in fear that perhaps they're going to leave, or not train your employees and worry that they're going to stay.
Yeah, that is the gist of it. Maybe whether it's the exact words I used, I don't know, but it's the gist of it. And that is that we often don't invest in our employees. And you hear people say, well, I don't want to send them to all this training because I'm going to train them up and they're going to leave, right? And particularly in the public sector, if I spend all this money training you on how to be an Agile developer, then you're going to go get a job at a defense contractor and make twice what you're making. And so I don't want to train you. Well, all that results in is you having a bunch of employees who don't know how to do their job. and that's not very helpful, right? So sure. I cannot train you. Well, what does that get me? So, my take on it is always train people to be really great and to do their best. And then if they leave in 2 or 3 or 4 years, okay, you got 2 or 3 or 4 years out of them before they left. And guess what? Then they went to that contractor, and maybe they're coming back and doing work for you, and they know your organization. Or maybe they're going to tell their friends where they go that, hey, I learned lots of stuff when I was working for that agency. You should go work over there. Right? And you get this pipeline of new blood. I mean, I love for employees to stay, but I also frankly love for some of them to leave, because we can't have an organization that doesn't change, because you don't learn anything new. If you have all the same people for 20 years, no one's learning anything. There's no new knowledge coming in. So you want some turnover.
So the training creates almost like a universal good karma. Your philosophy of, hey, people are going to appreciate that. They could come back. They could be part of our organization from the outside. It's going to create a lot of positive. Hey, kitty cat. They're going to be they're going to be creating a lot of good stuff from that perspective. We do in my organization, and we work with organizations a lot on the catastrophic cost of turnover. And part of the issue is training people to go from they come in the organization, they can't log into the computer, they don't know where the bathrooms are, and they're expected to be performing at a high level so quickly. Should organizations be tracking the catastrophic cost of turnover? Is that something that should be on their radar screen?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that if your turnover is through the roof, that's a huge problem. There's a middle ground, and I think that there's here's the other challenge with not training people. Right, there's a group of people who really want to learn. If you don't train them, they're going to leave. So you're going to lose people anyway if you don't. It's like a retention
strategy to train them,
right? And the people you lose if you don't train are the best ones, right? You're more than likely the people you lose are often the best ones, because they have opportunities and they leave, and that's okay. Sometimes, though, when you train people and you make it a great environment, the best ones just love it and they stay. But I guarantee you that if you don't, that the ones who stay when in a bad environment are not going to be the best employees. If you're not training people, if you're not growing, if you're not an interesting place to work, the folks you get to stay are not the ones you want. And so you got to create an environment where good people want to stay. And by the way, they bring up all those other people who maybe were sort of mediocre, right? They help them be better.
They raise all ships, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe not all ships, but maybe 95% of ships.
Most ships. Well, let's talk about maybe the other 5% here. What, without including names, what's your most colorful story of when someone quit or was fired?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think the most colorful story I have for someone who I had to let go was this guy I hired in a job, and he was, and of course I didn't know this whole backstory, but he was dating the rep from one of our suppliers, and then he eventually said, I'm dating so and so, and if she doesn't get the business from this organization, they're going to fire her. And so she needs to be on the account. And then she was telling her boss that I was insisting that she be on the account because she was dating this guy.
Ouch.
And I wound up, letting him go for that and some other reasons. And then her boss and I got together and had a conversation. I'm like, you know what he told me? And she said, well, let me tell you what she told me.
Oh, well, it's like a love triangle gone wrong, trying to bring the bosses in it. Like, can't y'all keep that outside the organization?
Yeah. They both, she lost her job too. So they both lost out on that deal.
Oh.
But yeah, that was probably the most colorful. I mean, I've had to
that's a good one.
Go for some unpleasant reasons, but that was probably the most colorful one.
Just a few more questions here. And what's a time when you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it lead to growth or success down the road?
Well, I think that certainly the most, I don't know that it was unexpected, but certainly the biggest challenge for me was in the fall of 2008, which is, brilliant timing. I was laid off by HP. And so, getting laid off at basically the peak of the Great Recession, certainly led me to develop some resilience, and it also led me to the public sector because I had actually a job offer in another sector that was rescinded because of the recession hitting. It was a sector that was hit very early in the recession. So here I had lined up a job, suspecting I was going to get laid off, lose the job I had lined up. And so I was, out in the street looking for a job at the height of the Great Recession with a high school senior at home. So it was certainly an opportunity to reconsider what I wanted to do and to figure out what the future was going to look like. And I think it gave me the opportunity to recognize that I wanted to try public service. And so,
wow,
worked out.
It led to something pretty amazing.
Yeah, it did. And just in time too, because I was starting to, feel like the money was getting a little tight.
Wow. Amazing. Was there any one thing that kept you going during that time period?
I don't know that there's one thing, but I think, certainly what's funny is it's probably a reflection of I don't know if it's a reflection of teenagers or a reflection of where I was, but when I was getting my security clearance, they wanted, they need to verify lapses in employment. They're like, well, we need someone who can verify you're unemployed. And I'm like, well, I had a 16-year-old at home, call him. And they called him, and then they called me back and said, he doesn't remember you being unemployed. And I called him back, and I'm like, how didn't you notice I was home all the time? I mean, what did you think was going on? My life didn't change at all. So, part of it was keeping his life.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I should tighten the belt on him a little more.
You provided a very stable environment. So for him, life was still rocking along. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, so certainly I think having him to get through his senior in high school was probably good. But, I've been through some less than wonderful things in my life, and I'm not someone who quits. I mean, the last time something pretty awful happened, a few days later, the EPA administrator was in my office, and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, where else should I be?" She's like, "Okay." She's like, "Okay. Well, if you need anything, let me know." But it was you just keep putting one foot in front of another. As one of so I tell you a little story. So my 16-year-old is actually my nephew. He's now a lot older than that, and engaged and owns a house. But and he'd had some, he'd lived with my parents before he came to live with me. And obviously his mother wasn't able to care for him. His father wasn't around. So he'd gone through this period. My father had died. My mother had died. His father died kind of in a sort of weird and kind of tragic way just after he'd gotten to see him again. And I said to him at some point, I don't know why we were talking this, but I said, you've been through all this with grandma and grandpa and your dad. And I said, and you're always happy. And what do you think about that? And he said, well, I can choose to be happy or I can choose to be sad, and I choose to be happy. This kid's like 17, right? So, that really sort of made an impression on me at that point. That, it's a way to look at life, that you choose to be happy. You choose to enjoy life. And, the reality is that we're still very lucky, right? I've got a roof over my head. He had a roof over his head, and that was part of it. He said to me, I always knew there'd be someone to take care of me. And he listed off like 10 family members of people who would take care of him if I wasn't there. But, the life we live is pretty good, even when bad things happen to us. Wow. We're not worrying about eating. We're not worrying about some place to live. And so I think that, while I have ups and downs, life's pretty good.
Well, I'm speechless. That was very, thank you for sharing that. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds like quite a person, that your nephew.
Yeah, he's a pretty good kid. Maybe you should interview him next.
Maybe so. Wow. we could wrap on that. I usually like to that's amazing. I usually ask about any references or websites or books that you recommend for people. And I think from you, no pressure, but I think there might be, you might have a couple of amazing ones that people could benefit from. If none come up, that's okay. But I was just,
well, Ben, I got to take the opportunity to pitch my new book, which I think is the opportunity.
Oh, yeah. That's right. See, you knocked me off with that last. Yes, I have that. Let's talk about this. This is actually a good point to wrap on. Let's talk about your book. And having gone through that myself, I know what a marathon endeavor that is. So why you're writing the book and tell us about it, or you've already written it. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So it's already actually live for pre-order on Amazon, and it's available on November 10th. It's the book is Industrial Digital Transformation. And I have 3 great co-authors from Oracle and Intel. So the load was lighter, but I won't say it was light because, as you say, it's a 350-page book. It's a lot of work to get out a book, as you know. But it was an opportunity, excuse me, to really talk about how companies can transform. And there are, in my mind, there are kind of 2 threads that go through the book. One is what's the technology? The nuts and bolts of here's the technology, here's how people have applied it, here are things you can do. But the other is actually how to do it. And we talk a lot about, here's tools and processes to actually help you implement a digital transformation. And we talk about both the public and the private sector. And part of my role was to really flesh out the public sector piece because my colleagues don't have a lot of public sector experience. And so we give a good history of digital transformation in recent years in the public sector and some of the challenges of doing that in the public sector. But then more generally, how do you get a transformation done? And so it's meant to be a really practical book. And so when my lead author invited me to join them, I jumped at it. It turned out to be a pandemic project, which worked out, I guess, because it would have been harder while traveling. Our publisher had a schedule. And we stuck to that schedule. I think we may have missed a couple deadlines by a few days, but we basically stuck to the schedule. And it only got dicey towards the end when we were still writing chapters and doing first revisions and second revisions at the same time. It got a little tense, tight at that point.
I can imagine. And what are you hoping that people take away when they crack that first page and they get through the book, go all the way through? What's the essence?
Well, I hope they take away the idea that this is something they can do, that they can engage.
It's available for people to do. Okay.
They can change their organization, whether they're the CEO or the CIO or their middle manager, that they can actually do this, that they can change their organization, that we've given them some tools to help them do that. That's really my hope for takeaways, that people will see it as a practical book that helps them move their organization forward.
It sounds like a really important book. One, I remember when I started in the workforce, there weren't really CTOs. There were not, there was technology, but it was kind of left almost siloed in the organization. And over time, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's now everywhere. And you've got to have someone at the helm. And digital transformations, I'm sure you get into this, it's hard because the technology is constantly moving. Well, when I hear digital transformation, I'm like, I hope it happens quickly because what you're transforming to may be entirely different by the time you get done if you're not moving quickly enough. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, the technology is moving fast, and that's hard. And the other piece is that it ends up being as much about culture as it is about technology. And if so many people try and do digital transformation without attacking the culture, and then they wonder why it fails. So like in the software part of the world, you can't go from waterfall to agile without changing your organization. You can't do it. And so people need to embrace that it's an organization-wide change. Everybody's got to be involved, whether it's just a team that's doing this transformation or your whole company. Everybody who's doing the transformation has to be involved. And so it's your point, it's got to go fast because the technology will leave you and you'll get your transformation done and the technology will be old. I mean, that's the problem with the way government has worked in the past. By the time they get some implemented, the technology is already obsolete. And that doesn't make sense. So.
Yeah, wow. Well, it's coming out this November. It's available for pre-order now, I saw. So everyone go and check that out. If you're hearing this afterwards, go check it out. I think it sounds like it's a very thorough book and a very practical book, and it's addressing some really important issues. And maybe we can get you on again. We can do a little deep dive into the book if you'd be up for it. No,
I'd love to talk more about it. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Right. Anything else before we wrap up?
So I've talked your ear off, Ben. So I probably should wrap up. But thank you. I probably should throw that Go Jackets in there.
We'll have to share this with Georgia Tech. I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
They will
shout outs they get.
But Thank you very much for the time, Ben.
You're welcome.
Ben Fanning is a #1 best-selling author, Inc. magazine columnist, and CEO of the Fanning Group, an international consultancy and corporate training company. To learn how they can help your organization, go to benfanning.com.